I'm Kaishen, and this is the story of how blood became poison in a boardroom built on betrayal. They say money changes people. But I learned something darker: money reveals who people really were all along. And sometimes, the people you'd die for are the ones sharpening the knife for your back. Our family's empire started as a joke. Dad's cramped electronics repair shop in a dying strip mall in downtown Seattle, where broken phones went to find second chances. My sister Zoe was the golden child, Harvard MBA. Magazine covers. The works. Dad's eyes lit up like Christmas morning whenever she walked into a room. Me, I was the shadow. The one hunched over circuit boards at 3 in the morning. Fingers stained with solder. Chasing something everyone else thought was impossible. While Zoe conquered Wall Street boardrooms in Manhattan, I was hacking together code in that dusty back room, surrounded by the smell of burnt electronics and broken dreams. My professors at Seattle Community College thought I was wasting my life. "You're brilliant, Kai," they'd say. "Why settle for this?" But I saw something they didn't. In every broken device, in every frustrated customer, there was a gap, a need, a chance to build something that mattered. The breakthrough came during my final semester. 12 years ago. I'd been working on inventory management software, nothing sexy, nothing that would make headlines. Just clean, brutal efficiency wrapped in elegant code. When local businesses started throwing money at us for licenses, Dad's dismissive shrugs turned into something resembling pride. "Maybe my quiet son isn't so useless after all," he said. And for one perfect moment, I thought I'd finally found my place in his world. I should have known better. Over the next 7 years, I poured everything into transforming our little repair shop. While Zoe collected accolades at her Manhattan consulting firm, I was building something real. Our shop evolved into Chen Dynamics, a software company that corporations across the Pacific Northwest couldn't ignore. My mother would find me passed out at my desk, code still glowing on multiple monitors. "You're killing yourself for this, Kai," she'd whisper, draping a blanket over my shoulders. "There's more to life than proving yourself." But I couldn't stop. Every line of code, every satisfied client, every revenue spike was another step closer to earning the respect I'd been chasing my entire life. 5 years ago, when we hit our first million in annual revenue, everything changed. Suddenly, Zoe was very interested in the family business again. She quit her 6-figure consulting job in New York and came home to Seattle with a smile that made my stomach twist into knots. "It's time for real leadership," she announced over dinner, her voice carrying that familiar note of condescension wrapped in silk. "With my experience, we can take this company to places Kai could never imagine." Dad practically glowed. Finally, some professional expertise at the helm. I sat there, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, watching my life's work get handed over, like a birthday present. The company I'd built from literal trash was suddenly Zoe's inheritance. She was named co-CEO the next week. What I didn't know was that Dad had been quietly restructuring ownership without telling me. In his excitement over Zoe's return, he'd convinced me to sign what I thought were routine operational documents. Hidden in that paperwork was a stock redistribution. Dad retained 45%, but gave Zoe 30%, leaving me with only 25%. The irony was delicious in its cruelty. While I continued developing the products that generated our revenue, Zoe became our public face. She gave TED Talks about innovation she'd never touched, accepted awards for breakthroughs she couldn't even pronounce, and slowly, methodically began erasing me from the company's origin story. Our revenue exploded to $50 million over the next 3 years. But so did the suffocating realization that I was being edited out of my own creation. Zoe started holding board meetings with Dad and their newly appointed outside directors, business school cronies, who knew nothing about our industry but everything about corporate politics. They made decisions about my software, brought in Zoe's MBA buddies to optimize systems they didn't understand. Each executive order felt like another nail in my coffin. But I wasn't sitting idle. While they played boardroom games, I was playing a longer game entirely. 2 years ago, I'd quietly established Nexus Technologies LLC as my personal consulting company. Every major software innovation I developed afterward was technically created as a contractor for Chen Dynamics. Not as an employee. The intellectual property rights were carefully structured to remain with Nexus Technologies. With Chen Dynamics holding only licensing agreements, I made sure every client contract included personal service clauses tied directly to my involvement. I cultivated relationships, solved their problems personally, and made myself indispensable to their operations. What looked like dedication to Chen Dynamics was actually building my own fortress. Then came Dad's 60th birthday party, the night my sister finally showed her true colors. Zoe had rented the ballroom at the Meridian Grand in downtown Seattle, transforming what should have been a family celebration into a corporate networking circus. 300 of the city's most influential power players all gathered to witness what they thought would be another boring family milestone. I arrived in my standard black suit, only to catch Zoe's withering glare. "Seriously, you couldn't even try to look successful," she hissed. "These people judge everything." Kai. The evening unfolded with painful predictability. Zoe worked the room like a political candidate, her laugh perfectly calibrated for each audience. I found myself doing what I always did, ensuring things ran smoothly, while everyone else took credit. After dinner, Zoe clinked her champagne glass, calling for attention. "As we celebrate Dad's milestone," she began, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "it's time to announce some important changes at Chen Dynamics." My blood turned to ice. "The board has voted unanimously," she continued, her eyes finding mine across the room, "for streamlined leadership, moving forward." I knew this was coming. The board meetings I'd been excluded from. The hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Too long. We've been held back by outdated thinking and resistance to change. Her smile was razor-sharp. "That's why. Effective immediately. I'm assuming the role of sole CEO." The words hit like a physical blow. Around me, 300 faces watched my public execution, with the fascination of spectators at a car crash. "Some people," Zoe added, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "are better suited for technical roles than actual leadership. My brother Kai has done admirable work maintaining our legacy systems. But in today's rapidly evolving market, we need vision. We need excellence." She paused, letting her next words sink in like poison. "And frankly, Kai, you're just not equipped for this level of business. Your community college education and narrow technical focus have become limitations we can no longer accommodate." The silence was deafening. I felt every eye in the room dissecting me, seeing exactly what Zoe wanted them to see: a small man in over his head, finally being put in his proper place. But as I stood up, my chair scraping against the marble floor, I wasn't thinking about humiliation. I was thinking about the emails queued in my drafts folder, ready to send with a single click. I walked over to Dad's table, placed his wrapped gift in front of him, and said simply, "Happy birthday, Dad. Enjoy your celebration." Then I left, my footsteps echoing in the stunned silence, knowing that tomorrow would bring a reckoning none of them saw coming. Because while Zoe was busy playing politics and collecting awards, I'd been doing something far more important. I'd been building an exit strategy. The next morning, I arrived at our headquarters in the South Lake Union District before dawn. Watching the sunrise paint the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. At exactly 9 a.m., Zoe swept through the entrance with Dad, both wearing expressions of triumphant satisfaction. Zoe's voice mixed surprise with irritation. "What are you doing here? I assumed you'd have the dignity to stay away after last night's transition." I smiled, pulling out my tablet. "Just handling some final business matters." "Zoe, but since you're both here, we should discuss the immediate future of Chen Dynamics." "There's nothing to discuss," Dad interjected, his voice firm with newfound authority. "The board has spoken. Zoe is now the sole CEO." I interrupted, tapping my tablet. The main conference room screen flickered to life, displaying a legal document. "Yes," I heard. "Congratulations. But there are some operational details we need to address immediately." I expanded the image, making sure they could read every word. "You see, while you were busy planning corporate coups, I was ensuring business continuity. There are some contractual obligations that require immediate attention." Click. The screen filled with licensing agreements and intellectual property documents. The core software systems that generate 80% of our revenue, the inventory management suite, the client portal, the analytics platform, are all proprietary technologies owned by Nexus Technologies, LLC, my independent consulting company. Chen Dynamics operates under licensing agreements that include specific performance and leadership continuity clauses. The color began draining from their faces. Per the terms I established when I developed these systems as a contractor rather than an employee, any change in my role or status triggers an automatic review period. The board's decision to remove me from operational oversight constitutes a material breach of our service agreements. Zoe's perfectly manicured fingers gripped the conference table's edge. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You developed those systems while working for the company. While working as a contractor for the company." I corrected, opening another document. "Here are the consulting agreements I've been operating under for the past 2 years. Every innovation, every upgrade, every critical system component was developed by Nexus Technologies and licensed to Chen Dynamics." Click. A cascade of client contracts appeared on screen. And here's where it gets interesting. Our major clients didn't just sign with Chen Dynamics, they signed for my personal involvement in their projects. 87% of our revenue comes from contracts that include personal service clauses tied directly to my continued participation. Dad collapsed into a chair, understanding, flooding his features. "The contracts I signed last month," he muttered. "The ones you said were routine renewals, were actually termination notices with 60-day grace periods." I finished. "I gave you 2 months to reconsider your management decisions. Last night's public humiliation was your answer." Zoe's composure finally cracked. "You manipulative bastard. You've been planning this coup for years." "I've been protecting my work for years," I replied calmly. "You wanted to play hardball corporate politics. Welcome to the major leagues." I stood up, straightening my jacket. "Here's what happens next. As of this morning, Nexus Technologies is exercising its right to terminate all licensing agreements with Chen Dynamics. Our clients are being notified that their service contracts will transfer directly to my new company, effective in 30 days. I clicked to the final slide, a spreadsheet showing revenue projections. Without my software and client relationships, Chen Dynamics retains approximately 8% of its current revenue stream. The rest comes with me. Dad's face had aged a decade in 10 minutes. "There has to be another option," he said weakly. "There is," I said, my voice softening slightly. "You both step down immediately. I acquire controlling interest in Chen Dynamics at fair market value, which, given the circumstances, has dropped considerably. You retain your shares as silent partners, receiving dividends but having no operational authority." I paused, looking at my sister. "Zoe gets a generous severance package and sterling recommendations for her next position, preferably somewhere far from Seattle." Zoe's face cycled through shades of red I didn't know existed. "You're destroying everything Dad built." "I'm saving what I built," I corrected. "Dad created a repair shop. I created a technology company. The only thing being destroyed here is your delusion that you could waltz in and take credit for my life's work." My phone buzzed with the first client confirmation. Microsoft's subsidiary had just agreed to transfer their contract directly to Nexus Technologies. "Time's running out," I said, showing them the message. "What's your decision?" The next several hours were a blur of lawyers, emergency board meetings, and corporate restructuring. By evening, I sat alone in what was now truly my office, looking out over Elliott Bay as the Seattle skyline glowed in the sunset. The company I'd built was finally wire. completely under my control. But the victory felt complex, triumphant, yet tinged with the melancholy of broken family bonds. That evening, Mom came to see me, her eyes red with exhaustion and grief. "Did it really have to end this way?" she asked softly. I met her gaze, my voice gentle but unwavering. "They forced this choice." "Mom," Zoe and Dad would have pushed me out entirely, taking everything I'd built and leaving me with nothing. She nodded slowly, understanding the business reality, even as her heart broke over the family fracture. "What happens now?" I turned my laptop toward her, showing the expansion plans. I'd been developing new product lines, international markets, innovations I'd kept hidden while Zoe played CEO. "Now," I said, feeling lighter than I had in years, "I build something even bigger. But this time, I'm doing it without people who see me as expendable." Under my sole leadership, Chen Dynamics has grown into a Pacific Northwest tech powerhouse worth over $300 million. We've expanded internationally, acquired 2 competitors, and become the industry standard for mid-market business software solutions. Zoe found work at a fintech startup in Austin, taking a significant step down from her CEO aspirations, but hopefully gaining some humility in the process. Dad retired quietly to a cabin on Whidbey Island, finally understanding that his golden child had nearly destroyed everything he'd worked to build. We see each other at holidays now, awkward family dinners, where we discuss the weather and carefully avoid mentioning business. The wounds are healing slowly, though some scars will remain forever. Sometimes, late at night in my corner office, I look at old family photos and feel a twinge of sadness for what we lost. But then I remember that night at the Meridian Grand, the contempt in Zoe's voice, Dad's approving nod as she publicly gutted me, and I remind myself that respect isn't inherited. It's earned through competence and defended through preparation. They learned that lesson too late. My story has become legend in Seattle's tech community. A cautionary tale, whispered in boardrooms from Bellevue to Redmond. I catch fragments at industry events. That's Kai Chen. The one who... They never finished the sentence. They don't need to. Last month, I received an invitation to speak at the University of Washington Business School's graduation ceremony. The topic: strategic thinking and long-term planning in family business. I accepted with a slight smile, already planning my speech. After all, I have quite a story to tell about the importance of protecting your intellectual property and never underestimating the quiet ones in the room. The company continues to thrive, but more importantly, I've found peace with my choices. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply being so well prepared that betrayal becomes impossible. And sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's building something so successful that their treachery becomes irrelevant. As I sit here watching the ferries cross Puget Sound, I remember something Mom once told me: success is the best revenge. But wisdom is knowing when to stop seeking revenge and start building something beautiful. She was right. I've moved beyond revenge now. These days, I'm focused on creating something that will outlast petty jealousies and family drama, a company that succeeds on merit, innovation, and respect for the people who actually do the work. I still have that wrapped birthday present. I never gave Dad a photo album chronicling our company's journey from that cramped repair shop to the tech empire. It's become, maybe someday, when enough time has passed, I'll finally give it to him. For now, it sits on my shelf next to my awards for innovation and entrepreneurship. A quiet reminder that our greatest strengths often grow in the shadows where others refuse to look. Story 2. The mahogany-paneled office in downtown Denver fell silent as my brother's triumphant declaration echoed off the walls: I get the house and the empire. He only gets the toy soldiers. The assembled vultures, our relatives, erupted in cruel laughter, their eyes gleaming with anticipated inheritance scraps. But Notary Harrison Cross cleared his throat, his steel-gray eyes finding mine across the room on this crisp October morning in 2024. Actually, he said, his voice cutting through their mirth like a blade through silk, Mr. Kane never owned the company directly. My name is Alex Kane. At 28, I've spent the last decade working at Kane Industries, while my golden boy brother Blake partied his way through business school on daddy's dime. What my family didn't know was that 3 years ago, when our company faced a major lawsuit that could have destroyed everything, Dad made a strategic decision that would change all our lives. Blake's face transformed from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to something approaching terror. What do you mean he never owned it directly? Harrison Cross, the only man in that room besides me who knew the truth, pulled out a leather portfolio thick with documents. 3 years ago, facing potential bankruptcy from the Peterson lawsuit, your father transferred Kane Industries to a family trust. Alex was named as the sole beneficiary and trustee, with your father remaining as a consultant until his death. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Aunt Sophie's champagne flute slipped from her manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Uncle Marcus made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. And Blake looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "This is impossible," he stammered, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled as he ran his hands through it. "I'm the eldest. I studied business. Dad always said I'd take over." The irony wasn't lost on me. While Blake was studying business, which mostly involved fraternity parties and semester-long trips to Europe, I was the one Dad turned to when the company faced its darkest hour. The Peterson lawsuit threatened $50 million in damages. Blake was skiing in Aspen that week, posting Instagram stories while I worked 18-hour days with our lawyers. "Dad did tell you that you'd take over," I said, speaking for the first time since the reading began. My voice was calm, measured, but he also told you that leadership had to be earned. You assumed it would be handed to you regardless. Blake's face flushed red. "But we discussed it constantly," he said. "He said a lot of things." I interrupted. "He also watched what we both did when the company was on the brink of collapse. You went skiing. I saved the business." The notary adjusted his glasses. "Perhaps I should clarify the timeline. When Kane Industries faced the Peterson lawsuit in 2021, Mr. Conesenor consulted with both sons about the crisis. Blake suggested hiring expensive consultants and taking a defensive approach. Alex proposed the settlement strategy that ultimately saved the company $35 million and preserved all jobs." I pulled out my briefcase, something I'd brought knowing this moment might come. Dad started testing us both after that. Every major decision, every crisis, he'd present the problem to both of us separately and see how we responded. The room was dead silent now. The earlier celebration forgotten. The Riverside Development Project in 2022. I continued, opening a folder. Zoning issues threatened to kill our biggest contract. Blake suggested we sell our stake to avoid risk. I spent 3 months in City Hall, worked with environmental lawyers, negotiated with community groups, saved the project and our reputation. I opened another folder. The union negotiations last year. Blake wanted to outsource to non-union workers to cut costs. I negotiated a deal that kept our skilled workforce and actually reduced long-term expenses by 12%. Each revelation hit the room like a physical blow. The family members who'd been laughing at my toys inheritance were now staring at Blake with growing understanding and disappointment. Every test, every crisis, the same pattern. I said quietly. Blake looked for the easy way out. I looked for solutions that protected the company and our people. Blake's expensive suit suddenly looked wrinkled and cheap. "But I have an MBA from Wharton which Dad paid for," I replied. "After you barely graduated from CU Boulder with a 2.3 gigapascals. Your Wharton admission was secured by Dad's $2 million donation to their building fund." The notary coughed diplomatically. "Your father left specific instructions about this revelation," he said. And I quote, "Blake needs to understand that privilege is not the same as competence." Harrison continued reading from Dad's detailed notes. Regarding the personal inheritance, Blake receives the family estate in Aspen, valued at $4.2 million, along with its $3.2 million mortgage and annual maintenance costs of approximately $180. Ling ling ling. Blake perked up momentarily. Then his face fell, as the math sank in. Alex inherits what your father called the legacy collection: military figurines, model aircraft, and historical collectibles accumulated over 4 generations. Blake actually snorted with derision. Toys. At least that makes sense. Harrison's lips quirked into what might have been a smile. According to the most recent appraisal conducted by Sotheby's auction house, the collection's current market value is $12.8 million. It includes extremely rare pieces, original 1,960 seconds G.I. Joe prototypes, limited edition military models from the 1,970 seconds, and a complete set of 1,980 seconds die-cast aircraft that were never mass-produced. The silence that followed was deafening. Blake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. 12 million. Your great-grandfather began collecting military models after returning from World War II. Harrison explained. Each generation added carefully selected pieces. Your father was particularly astute about their investment potential. Alex has maintained detailed provenance records and market valuations for every item, tracking auction sales and market trends. While Blake rolled his eyes at kid stuff, I'd spent years researching each piece, understanding its historical significance, monitoring auction prices. What looked like child's play to him was actually a sophisticated investment portfolio that outperformed most stocks over the past decade. Let me understand this, Blake said, his voice rising with panic. Alex gets a company worth what exactly? Harrison consulted his documents. Kane Industries was valued at $340 million as of last month. Under Alex's management as trustee, the company's value has increased 45% over 3 years. Despite the challenging economic climate, Blake's face cycled through several shades of red and purple. This can't be legal. He manipulated Dad somehow. Dad was sick. Confused, actually. Harrison interrupted, producing another document. Your father underwent a comprehensive psychological evaluation 6 months before his death. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a court-certified psychiatrist, deemed him completely mentally competent. He specifically requested this evaluation to prevent exactly this type of challenge. I stood up, straightening my tie. Blake. Dad spent the last 3 years of his life watching us both. Every conversation, every decision, every crisis was a test. You failed them all. The final blow came when Harrison produced a sealed envelope. Your father left this letter, with instructions to read it only after the inheritance details were revealed. He handed it to me. Dad's distinctive handwriting read, "To be opened when Blake finally understands." I broke the wax seal and read aloud. To my son, Alex, who proved that leadership is about service, not privilege. You earned every responsibility through dedication and wisdom. To Blake, who confused entitlement with inheritance. You had every advantage, education, connections, opportunities, but you never understood that respect must be earned through character and competence. Perhaps losing everything you expected will teach you the value of everything you took for granted. The company is safe in Alex's hands, as I always knew it would be. The silence stretched until Blake finally spoke. His voice barely above a whisper. What am I supposed to do now? I looked at my brother, this man who'd lived his entire life, expecting everything to be handed to him. Who'd spent years dismissing my contributions, while taking credit for my successes when it suited him. Now, I said, gathering my documents, you learn what I learned a long time ago, that success is built one honest day's work at a time. Dad gave you the same opportunities he gave me. What you did with them was your choice. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh. And Blake Kane Industries has a new policy. All executive positions require 5 years of proven industry experience. You're welcome to apply for an entry-level position like everyone else. The aftermath unfolded over the following months with predictable precision. Blake's reputation in Denver's business circles crumbled when word spread about the inheritance reversal. The networking contacts who'd courted him as the future Kane Industries heir suddenly stopped returning his calls. The Aspen estate became a financial anchor. Blake discovered that owning a $4.2 million property with a $3.2 million mortgage and six-figure annual expenses required actual income to sustain. Within 4 months, he was forced to list the property for sale, ultimately accepting a loss due to the urgent timeline. His job search proved equally humbling. Construction firms throughout Colorado knew the Kane family story. Interviews were polite but brief. "We'll be in touch" became a familiar refrain that never materialized into offers. Meanwhile, I moved into Dad's executive suite, now officially mine, in Kane Industries' downtown Denver headquarters. The nameplate, reading Alex Kane, CEO and president, represented not just a title change, but the culmination of years of preparation I hadn't fully realized were happening. Blake eventually found work as a junior project coordinator at a mid-sized development firm in Colorado Springs, earning $48,000 annually, less than his old monthly allowance from Dad. He rented a one-bedroom apartment in a complex I'd probably inspected for code compliance at some point, and watched from a distance as Kane Industries expanded under my leadership. 6 months after the reading, as I signed contracts for our most ambitious project, yet a sustainable housing development that would revolutionize affordable construction in the Denver metro area, I reflected on how Blake's years of condescension had inadvertently prepared me for this moment. His constant dismissal had forced me to document every success, prove every point, build an unshakable foundation of competence. His arrogance had taught me humility. His assumption that leadership was his birthright had shown me that true leadership must be earned daily. The military collectibles in my office, now displayed in custom cases with museum-quality lighting, serve as daily reminders that value isn't always obvious. Success isn't always loud, and the quiet ones often get the last laugh. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply letting people discover that the person they underestimated was in control all along. Story 3. I'm Rachel. 27. My parents demanded I postpone my wedding for nearly a decade so my unemployed brother could figure out his life. So I eloped without telling them. If you were in my shoes at 27, would you have waited or walked away like I did? I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the folder that held our draft invitations. The paper was thick, embossed with pale blue leaves along the border. Ethan and I had chosen them together on a snowy Saturday in February. Laughing over font choices and tasting small cakes the bakery sent home for sampling. I should have felt joy every time I opened that folder. But that morning the paper seemed heavy, as if my parents' words had been stamped across each card. Wait. You cannot marry until Brandon does. 10 years. If necessary. When Ethan slipped into the kitchen, he noticed my clenched jaw. He set a mug of coffee beside me and asked quietly, "Another message from your mom?" I nodded. The night before, my mother had texted, "Family order matters. Rachel, marriage must respect tradition. You will wait until Brandon is ready." Brandon, my 31-year-old brother, had been the golden child since birth. Ivy League graduate. Brilliant ideas. Endless potential, at least according to my parents. Yet for years, he floated from plan to plan, living at home, announcing grand ventures that never survived past a business card mock-up. My parents clung to his promise as if their belief could transform his inertia into momentum. Ethan pulled out the chair across from me. "We've saved nearly $40,000 for this wedding. We've booked the arboretum. Why do they think they can erase that?" I wished I had an answer. All I could offer was a half smile. Growing up, I had learned that in my family logic bent around Brandon. My achievements: graduating college, landing an accounting job downtown, building an independent life, were treated like footnotes. Brandon's vague dreams were headlines. I closed the folder and pushed it aside. On the fridge door hung a magnet-clipped grocery list: milk, bread, eggs, and beneath it, a sticky note Ethan had left. "This is our life, not theirs." His blocky handwriting steadied me. "Still?" My parents' voices echoed. I pictured them at their suburban dining table, Carol with her arms crossed. Dennis nodding quietly beside her. Family order comes first. She had repeated during our last visit. Your brother is older. The community would talk if you married before him. Do you want to embarrass us? Embarrass them. That word stung. For years, I had believed my hard work would make them proud. Instead, they feared the whispers of neighbors more than celebrating my happiness. Ethan reached across the table, covering my hand. Rachel, we can't let them steal this from us. We deserve to move forward. He swallowed hard, watching his ringless finger resting on mine. He was right. We had been engaged since 2020. Waiting through pandemic delays. Saving diligently. We had a plan. A date. A future. Yet my parents clung to their illusion of tradition, as though withholding their blessing could freeze time. Later that day, I walked through our small apartment, touching the objects that marked the life Ethan and I built. The bookshelf we assembled on our first anniversary, the framed photo from a road trip to the North Shore, the stack of bank statements proving every month of saving, each deposit nudging us closer to the Arboretum. These were my artifacts. My proof that adulthood had arrived, despite my parents' refusal to see it. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Mom. Think carefully. If you rush, you betray family. I set the phone down without answering. That evening, Ethan cooked pasta while I sat with our best friend, chosen as maid of honor, who had stopped by. She flipped through the draft invitations. These are perfect. Are you seriously considering canceling because of Brandon? Her bluntness made my throat tighten. I explained the latest ultimatum. How my parents had repeated the decade demand. She shook her head. You've already waited. How much of your life are you supposed to sacrifice for his? I looked at Ethan across the kitchen. He stirred sauce slowly, shoulders tense. For years he had stayed respectful toward my parents, but I knew his patience was thinning. Night fell, and after our friend left, Ethan and I sat on the couch. The glow of the television barely lit the room. He finally said, we could do it quietly. Just us. Close friends. My parents. You don't need their permission. The thought scared me, but it also lifted a weight. I pictured the Arboretum's garden paths lined with tulips. A quiet ceremony, free of judgmental eyes. Still? Guilt twisted in me. It would break them. I whispered. Ethan squeezed my hand. They broke you first. I hardly slept. I lay awake replaying memories of childhood. Brandon receiving applause for a school play, while I was told to keep my voice down. Brandon failing a course, and my parents blaming the teacher. Me earning an A, and hearing only silence. Those patterns had shaped me into someone who worked harder. Stayed keter. Hoping to be noticed. But marriage was not a grade on a report card. It was the rest of my life. At dawn, I rose and returned to the table. I opened the folder again, tracing the pale blue leaves on the invitation border. I imagined sliding them into envelopes, addressing them to people who truly supported us. In that moment, I felt clarity. The choice was not between my parents and Brandon, not even between tradition and rebellion. It was between surrendering the life I had built and protecting it. When Ethan woke, I met him in the kitchen. We're going to marry, I said firmly. He studied my face, then smiled with relief. With or without them? With or without them? I answered. He wrapped his arms around me, the smell of coffee lingering on his shirt. For the first time in months, my chest loosened. That day, we began sketching a new plan. The Arboretum was still booked, but the guest list would shrink. No distant relatives expecting a show of tradition, only those who understood us. My maid of honor, Ethan's parents, a few close friends. As I wrote names in neat columns on a yellow legal pad, I felt both grief and liberation. Grief for the family I wished I had. Liberation for the life I was choosing anyway. I placed the pad beside the folder, Two artifacts, side-by-side evidence of a boundary drawn. Looking at those papers, I realized a quiet wedding would be louder than any protest. It would say I am more than a daughter in the shadow of a golden child. I am Rachel, and I choose my own life. The year was 2015, and I was 18 when I first stepped onto the campus of the University of Minnesota. The air smelled faintly of leaves and asphalt, and students carried backpacks, weighed down by brand new textbooks. I felt both terrified and determined. For me, college was not just a chance at education, it was a promise of freedom. At home in the suburb where my parents lived, Brandon still dominated every conversation. He was 22, freshly back from the Ivy League with a diploma that my parents displayed like a crown jewel. I was proud of him at first, but quickly I saw the cracks. He talked endlessly about startups and future empires. But I noticed he never stayed in one job for more than a few months. He moved back in with Carol and Dennis, claiming he needed time to launch the big idea. Whenever I called home with updates, an A on my midterm, and a new part-time job at the library, my mother's voice always shifted back to Brandon. He's meeting investors soon, she would say. He might change the whole industry. My 4 years at Minnesota taught me more than accounting. They taught me how it felt to be invisible in my own family. I worked 2 part-time jobs to supplement what my parents had given me. Nearly $25,000 toward tuition. That money, they reminded me often, was a sacrifice they made to keep me afloat. Brandon, on the other hand, received unspoken credit for simply existing. When his ventures collapsed, my parents soothed him with words of encouragement. When I pulled 18-hour study days, they warned me not to stress too much because they assumed my success was guaranteed. It was during senior year, in 2018, that I met Ethan. We both reached for the same cup of bad coffee in the student union and laughed about the long line. He was already planning to enter an MBA program, and he carried himself with quiet focus. We began studying together, sharing notes and late-night meals from campus food trucks. Ethan noticed quickly that I never mentioned my family with warmth. One evening, as we worked through a cost accounting problem set, he asked, "Why do you look sad every time you bring up your parents?" I told him about Brandon, about the golden child pedestal, about how my parents measured everything in terms of how it affected him. Ethan listened without interrupting, then said simply, "That sounds exhausting. You deserve more space to be seen." His words startled me, because no one in my family had ever said anything close. Graduation in 2018 felt like stepping out of one world into another. My parents came, of course, but their smiles were tight. Brandon attended too, boasting to relatives about his next project while I stood in my cap and gown, clutching the diploma that proved my independence. I still remember the group photo after the ceremony. My parents stood beside Brandon, beaming. I was placed at the edge, holding my rolled diploma like a prop. Later that night, Ethan sent me the picture with a text, "You're the one with the real achievement here. Don't let them crop you out in your own story." That message became a quiet anchor during my first months working downtown at an accounting firm. The transition from student to professional was rough. My cubicle overlooked a row of buses, and the fluorescent lights often gave me headaches. But I felt pride every payday, seeing my name on a check I had earned without help. Brandon, meanwhile, continued pitching vague businesses. At Sunday dinners, he held forth about apps that would revolutionize finance or transform real estate. While I quietly passed the breadbasket, my parents asked me no questions about my clients, my exams, or the certifications I was pursuing. Instead, they leaned forward eagerly at Brandon's words, nodding at every phrase. I would sometimes bring Ethan along, hoping they might see the seriousness of our relationship. He always dressed neatly, shook their hands firmly, and tried to talk about his studies. My parents responded politely, but soon turned back to Brandon. In 2020, Ethan proposed. It was a quiet evening in our small apartment near campus. He had cooked dinner, and after dessert, he handed me a simple ring, saying, "I want to build a life with you, not just chase one." I said yes without hesitation. It was the most certain I had ever felt. When I called my parents with the news, there was a long pause. Then my mother said, "Well, let's hope Brandon meets someone soon too. It would be strange if you married first." I hung up the phone that night with my stomach sinking. Instead of celebrating, I had been measured once again against my brother's non-existent progress. I kept working, moving slowly up in responsibility at the firm. While Ethan advanced in his MBA program, we supported each other with small rituals, shared dinners, budget spreadsheets, weekend hikes. Together, we started saving. Even before we had a set wedding date. Every time I added to the savings folder, I felt both excitement and dread, wondering whether my parents would ever accept it. Brandon's life remained unchanged. He still lived at home, still circling through ideas. My parents still described him as on the verge. They never used words like that for me, even though my life was actually moving forward. One evening, Ethan and I sat with friends who asked about our plans. I confessed that my parents were lukewarm, almost dismissive. Ethan put his arm around me and said, "Then we'll plan for ourselves. We can't live for their approval." In that moment, I realized something vital. For years, I had chased their recognition like a child, seeking praise. But recognition was never coming. Not while Brandon's shadow stretched over every room. By the time 2020 arrived, I was engaged, employed, and living independently. Yet in my parents' eyes, I was still a placeholder until Brandon succeeded. What I didn't know was how far they would go to enforce that illusion and how hard I would have to fight for my own future. By 2021, I had been engaged for a year. The ring on my finger caught light at odd times while typing at the office, while brushing my hair before bed. It reminded me of the promise Ethan and I had made. Even when my parents' silence made that promise feel like rebellion, Ethan and I had begun saving immediately. Each month we moved a portion of our paychecks into a dedicated account. I kept a spreadsheet printed and tucked in a folder, with neat columns of deposits. By the end of 2023, we had accumulated nearly $40,000. That folder, worn at the edges, felt heavier than any trophy from childhood. It was proof that our life was real, independent, and deliberate. We lived in a modest apartment near downtown Minneapolis. The kitchen counters were chipped, the carpet faded, but every corner carried our effort. I often cooked while Ethan studied late into the night for his MBA courses. Our shared table covered in textbooks and receipts. We laughed about living like students again. But underneath was pride. No one else was paying for this. No one else was steering our ship. My parents never asked about those nights. They asked instead whether Brandon had called me. "He's networking," my mother would say with excitement. "He might launch something big soon." Each time, I bit my tongue. I wanted to say he's 30 and unemployed. We're the ones building a future. But silence felt safer. Even as it gnawed at me. In 2022, Ethan and I visited the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. It was a bright autumn day, the leaves blazing red and gold. We walked along the garden paths, and I imagined us standing there with friends, reciting vows under the open sky. We placed a deposit that day, my hands shaking as I signed. Back home, I slid the receipt into the wedding folder. Behind the spreadsheet of savings, 2 artifacts layered together. Evidence that we were moving forward. Family dinners grew more difficult. At the long oak table in my parents' suburban home, Brandon always had the floor. He described apps that would change how people invested, or ventures that required mysterious seed capital. My parents leaned in, eyes shining. When Ethan tried to join conversation mentioning his classes, asking about their garden, they responded politely, then returned to Brandon. One evening, I brought up our plans. "We've booked the Arboretum," I said carefully. My mother set down her fork. Rachel. It's not the right time. You know Brandon hasn't settled yet. My father added softly. Marriage should respect the natural order. Ethan's jaw tightened. With respect. Our marriage isn't about order. It's about us. The table fell silent. Brandon cleared his throat and began talking about venture capital. And just like that, my parents' attention shifted away. Later, as we drove home, Ethan gripped the steering wheel. They're never going to see you. Rachel. Not as you are. Only as someone who should wait. I stared out the window at the passing lights. I keep hoping if I show them enough proof, they'll understand. Proof doesn't work when they don't want it, he said quietly. In 2023, the pressure increased. My mother sent a string of messages. Remember who helped you with college? $25,000 doesn't come from nowhere. Family sacrifices mean you owe patience. I read those words at my desk during lunch break. My sandwich sat untouched. For years, I had carried gratitude for their support. But in that moment, gratitude curdled into a weapon. That evening, I pulled out the savings folder. I showed Ethan the spreadsheet, the Arboretum receipt, the growing balance. This is what we did ourselves, I said. He placed his hand over mine. This is the only proof that matters. We continued planning in secret, shrinking the guest list, choosing details that felt authentic. My maid of honor joined us in cafes, sketching ideas on napkins. We laughed about colors, flowers, playlists. These small acts became Defiance Kiat. Steady. Unstoppable. Meanwhile, my parents grew sharper in tone. Phone calls ended in accusations. You are selfish? My mother hissed once. You're supposed to support your brother. I hung up shaking, then turned to Ethan. Maybe I am selfish. But isn't that what building a life means, choosing your own joy? He kissed my forehead. If that's selfish, then let's be selfish together. The savings folder remained on our shelf, surrounded by textbooks and framed photos. Each time I opened it, I felt a surge of pride and a stab of sorrow. Pride, because we had built something real. Sorrow, because the people who should have cheered for me instead saw betrayal. Yet even in that tension, I sensed change inside me. I was no longer a daughter begging for recognition. I was a woman documenting her own progress, collecting artifacts of independence. By the end of 2023, our future was sketched in deposits and receipts, in notes on napkins, in whispered plans. My parents thought they held control, but I held the folder that proved otherwise. The question was how long I could carry it before breaking. Late in 2023, the leaves had fallen in Minneapolis, leaving branches bare against gray skies. Ethan and I drove to my parents' house for what I hoped would be a civil conversation. My stomach tightened as we pulled up to the driveway. I knew the script, but I still hoped for a change in tone. Inside, the dining room table was already set with coffee mugs and a plate of cookies. My mother folded her arms the moment I sat down. My father, Gitter, looked at his hands. Brandon leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, as though bored. Carol began. Rachel, we've thought about this carefully. You cannot marry until Brandon does. That means postponing. At least 10 years if necessary. The words landed like ice water. 10 years, I asked. Stunned. Yes, she said firmly. Family order must be respected. Brandon is older. People will talk if you cross that line. I turned to my brother. You're 31. Don't you think it's time you stand on your own? He shrugged. I'm working on things. But your rushing makes me look bad. Ethan's voice cut in. Low but sharp. This is absurd. Rachel and I have waited long enough. The air grew thick. My mother's eyes narrowed. We sacrificed $25,000 for your education. Rachel, you owe this family patience. My father added quietly. It's not just about you. It's about all of us. Heat rose in my chest. I wanted to scream that our 40,000 in savings was not theirs. That our future was not collateral for Brandon's indecision. Instead, I sat frozen, fingers pressing into the edge of my planner. Ethan reached under the table and squeezed my hand. "We're leaving," he said. Back at our apartment, I opened the planner and stared at the notes I had scribbled: guest lists, flower options, vows half-written. Tears blurred the ink. Ethan sat beside me. "Rachel, they will never let go. If we wait for approval, we'll wait forever," I whispered. "But if we go ahead, I'll lose them." He tilted me chin. "You already lost their approval. But you haven't lost yourself. Which matters more?" I looked at the vow drafts scattered across the table. Pale sheets with phrases crossed out and rewritten. They weren't polished yet. But they were ours. Unlike the endless demands of my parents, these words belonged to me. In the weeks that followed, I tried again to reason with them. Phone calls ended with accusations. "Selfish," my mother repeated. "You are betraying your brother." Once, after a particularly sharp exchange, I found a text from Ethan waiting when I got home. "We're doing this our way." I saved the message, scrolling back to it whenever doubt crept in. By January 2024, or décision solidifiée, the guest list shrank to a handful: my maid of honor, Ethan's parents, a few friends. The Arboretum deposit held firm. The garden would be ours that spring. One evening, I sat with my maid of honor in a coffee shop near campus. I showed her the planner, the vow drafts. She listened, then said, "Rachel, you're choosing yourself for the first time. That's not betrayal. That's survival." Her words anchored me. At home, Ethan and I placed the vow drafts beside the wedding folder, stacking proof of our independence. He pointed at them and said, "Every page is a step away from their control." I nodded. "Then let's keep writing." We spent that night shaping sentences, laughing at awkward phrases, crying at the weight of what we promised. Outside, snow fell in thick silence. Inside, we were building something unbreakable. The final call from my mother came a week later. Her voice cracked with anger. "If you do this without us, don't expect forgiveness." I held the phone, heart pounding, then said simply, "I'm not asking for forgiveness." And I ended the call. That night, staring at the glowing brochure of the Arboretum on our kitchen table, I felt both grief and relief. Our wedding would be everything we wanted, and nothing they could take away. Early spring in Minneapolis carried the scent of thawing earth and wet pavement. The snow melted in patches, revealing grass that had been buried for months. I looked out from our apartment window, thinking about how much had changed since winter. The silence from my parents was deafening. After our final call in January, they stopped reaching out. No texts, no emails, no Sunday invitations. Brandon's shadow still loomed. Friends told me he was pitching another big plan, though no one saw results. But in my daily life, they were simply absent. Ethan noticed my quiet moods. One evening, he set a thick binder on the table. Smiling, "Our wedding book," he said. Inside were pages of contracts, receipts, ideas clipped from magazines. At the front, he had slipped the Arboretum receipt, the proof of our deposit. I flipped through, touched by the care. "You've made this feel real," I whispered. "It is real," he answered. "It's ours." A week later, we visited his parents in their cozy home just outside Minneapolis. The smell of roast chicken filled the kitchen, and laughter echoed as his mother handed me a plate. Unlike my own parents, Ethan's welcomed me with warmth that left me blinking back tears. After dinner, Ethan's mom pulled me aside. She pressed a hand on mine and said softly, "Don't let anyone tell you your happiness is wrong. We're proud of you both." Her words were a balm I hadn't known I needed. Later, when she texted me, "We're excited to celebrate you." Rachel. I saved the message. It felt like a counterweight to every accusation I had endured. Back home, I sat with my maid of honor at a coffee shop. Our notebooks spread across the table. She sketched flower arrangements, while I listed names for our shortened guest list. It was only a handful now, those who truly mattered. "Your parents might not show," she said gently. "But look at what you do have." I glanced at her page filled with tulip doodles. I'm realizing that's enough. More than enough. Still, there were moments of ache. At night, I lay awake wondering if I should call again. Try once more to repair what felt broken beyond mending. But each time, I remembered my mother's voice, 10 years. Wait until Brandon does. That demand was not a bridge to reconciliation. It was a wall I could never climb. Ethan often found me staring at the wedding binder. He would sit beside me and say, "You're not alone in this. We're writing a new story, page by page." And slowly, I began to believe him. Spring crept closer. The city's streets dried, and small buds appeared on trees. With each change of season, my resolve deepened. I carried the wedding binder with me to work, flipping through pages during lunch breaks. In its neat sections, receipts, contracts, guest lists, I found a rhythm of independence. One afternoon, a colleague glanced at the binder and asked, "Your parents must be thrilled." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Some people aren't meant to be part of every chapter." Meanwhile, gossip about Brandon reached me through distant relatives. He was apparently planning a new company, talking about millions in venture funding. No one had seen a business plan, yet my parents clung to his promises, their pride unshaken. I stopped comparing. Each time I added a note to the binder, I reminded myself my life was tangible, lived, documented. His was always almost, never actual. A week before the wedding, Ethan and I sat on the floor of our apartment, surrounded by envelopes. We addressed invitations by hand, laughing at misspellings. I felt calm, even joyful. I looked at Ethan and said, "For the first time, I don't feel like I'm waiting. I'm choosing." He kissed me lightly. "That's the difference. Waiting is what they wanted. Choosing is what we do." As I slid the last envelope into a stack, I realized the distance from my parents hurt less than it once had. The binder beside me, thick with our plans, felt heavier than their silence. For the first time, I felt lighter, like I was walking toward a future of my own making. The morning of our wedding dawned crisp and clear. The kind of spring day that felt borrowed from summer. Sunlight streamed through the apartment blinds as I buttoned the dress. My maid of honor helped me choose. It was simple ivory fabric, a soft neckline, nothing ostentatious. I wanted elegance, not spectacle. Ethan waited at the arboretum, his suit pressed, his tie a shade of blue that matched the flowers blooming along the garden paths. As our car pulled in, my breath caught. The arboretum stretched out in waves of color tulips and daffodils, swaying gently. Trees budding overhead. It looked exactly as I had imagined when we placed that first deposit. Only now it was real. The ceremony began with the soft rustle of chairs, friends settling into rows. My maid of honor squeezed my hand. "This is it," she whispered. Music drifted through the garden as I walked down the aisle. My shoes clicked softly against the stone path. The scent of blossoms thick in the air. At the end, Ethan waited, his smile steady, his eyes bright. I glanced briefly at the seats where my parents might have been. Empty. The ache was sharp but fleeting, drowned out by the warmth of those who were present. Ethan's parents beamed, his father dabbing his eyes. Friends smiled, some holding phones discreetly, capturing moments. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, scribbled first in drafts late at night. now smoothed into promises. Ethan's voice was firm and steady. I will choose you every day. Not because it is easy, but because it is us. My own voice trembled. I have spent my life waiting for permission. With you, I need none. I promise to walk forward, always beside you. When we slipped rings onto each other's fingers, the weight was slight, but the meaning immense. Applause rippled across the garden as we kissed, sunlight glinting off the metal bands. After the ceremony, we moved to a rustic hall within the arboretum. Wooden beams crossed overhead, and candles flickered along the tables. Dinner was simple but heartfelt: roast chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. Laughter filled the space, echoing louder than any silence my parents had left behind. Ethan's father rose for a toast. He raised his glass, voice thick with emotion. Rachel, you are family, not because of today, but because of who you've been to Ethan for years. We're proud to witness your life together. I swallowed back tears. Those words, spoken by someone who had no obligation, carried more weight than all the approval my parents withheld. My maid of honor spoke next, recalling late nights of study sessions and whispered dreams. She looked at me, eyes shining. You've always been strong, Rachel, even when you doubted it. Today proves it. Laughter and clinking glasses followed. For once, every word spoken about me felt true. Not diminished, not compared. As the evening waned, Ethan and I stepped outside. The sky had turned deep blue, stars faintly visible. We walked the garden path hand in hand, still wearing our wedding clothes. The air smelled of lilacs. This is ours, Ethan said softly. I nodded, leaning into him. No one can take this day. We stood there a long while, letting silence hold us. Later, as guests departed, candid photos began to circulate on phones. Friends shared snapshots: Ethan and me laughing over cake, holding hands during vows, spinning on the dance floor. I saved a few to my own phone, treasuring them already. I imagined someday flipping through a wedding album, showing our children, telling them how love triumphed over noise. That night, back in our apartment, the binder still sat on the shelf. I added the vow cards and tucked a handful of photos inside. The binder was no longer just plans, it was a record of something accomplished. For the first time in years, I went to bed without dread. My parents' voices were absent, and yet the quiet felt full. As I drifted to sleep, Ethan's ring warm against my finger. I thought joy does not need an audience. It only needs truth. And today, truth belonged to us. A few weeks after the wedding, I sat at our apartment table, flipping through candid photos. Friends had sent us images: Ethan and me laughing over cake, holding hands during vows, swaying to music under the arboretum lights. Each picture made me smile. Then my phone buzzed. A notification lit up. I had been tagged in an album on Facebook. Another friend had uploaded our photos, dozens of them, and tagged Ethan and me. Within minutes, comments appeared, likes multiplying. For a brief moment, I was glad. People could see the joy we had built. But then another notification came, my mother's name flashing across the screen. I opened the message. Rachel, how could you? More followed in quick succession. You embarrassed us. You betrayed family. You ruined your brother's future. I sat frozen, scrolling. The words blurred together, heavy with rage. Ethan looked up from the couch. What's wrong? I handed him the phone. His eyes darkened as he read. Rachel, this isn't about you marrying. It's about control. They lost it, and they can't stand it. That night, the phone didn't stop buzzing. Voicemails piled up. My father's voice, low but firm. You have shamed us. People will talk. You have no idea what you've done to Brandon. Brandon himself left a message. his tone dripping with wounded pride. You couldn't wait. You ruined everything. Who's going to take me seriously now? When my own sister undercut me, I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. But the ache in my chest kept me quiet. I opened the family group chat. Dozens of messages scrolled by. Aunts and uncles weighed in, some echoing my parents' anger, others silent. One cousin sent a thumbs-up emoji on a photo, only to be scolded by my mother. I took screenshots, each one a shard of proof. Not because I needed to share them, but because they reminded me I wasn't imagining the cruelty. Ethan sat beside me, scrolling too. "Look at this," he said, showing me a message from his mom. "Don't let them crush you. We're proud of you both." The contrast nearly broke me. On one side, fury and blame. On the other, unconditional acceptance. Over the next week, the storm continued. Relatives called to mediate, suggesting I apologize. My mother left another voicemail, voice rising with each word. "You have destroyed your brother's reputation. Do you even care? He will never recover now." I stared at the phone, finally hitting delete. "I'm done listening," I said aloud. Ethan nodded. "Good. They're not asking for reconciliation, Rachel. They're demanding submission." We sat together in silence, the weight of years pressing down. Yet underneath was a strange calm. For the first time, their anger didn't dictate my choices. One evening, I stood by the window, Minneapolis lights glowing outside. My phone buzzed again. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I whispered to Ethan, "They can shout all they want, but they can't unwrite what we already lived." He wrapped his arm around me. "That's quiet justice. Rachel, living well, without their permission." I scrolled through our photos once more, me in my dress. Ethan smiling. Friends raising glasses. Proof of a day that existed, no matter who denied it. Proof that happiness had bloomed, even in the absence of those who should have stood beside me. For once, their words didn't decide my life. They only proved I had chosen right. By the summer of 2024, life in Minneapolis had settled into a rhythm. Our apartment felt different, somehow lighter. The binder sat on its shelf, thick now with vow cards, photos, and receipts. I sometimes flipped through it on quiet evenings. Not to plan, but to remember. Ethan and I built routines, shared breakfasts before work, weekend walks around the lakes, dinners with his parents. Every time we stepped into their home, I felt welcomed in a way I had never known with my own family. His mother often hugged me at the door. His father asked about my clients at the firm, and no one mentioned Brandon or obligations or order. My own parents remained silent. Weeks passed without a word. Brandon posted vague updates, online photos of coffee cups, captions about big meetings, but no real progress. Through distant relatives, I heard he still lived at home, still talking more than doing. Once, an aunt reached out quietly. "I saw your photos," she said over the phone. "You looked happy. That's what matters." Her voice carried a softness I hadn't expected. It reminded me that silence in the family group chat didn't always mean disapproval. Sometimes it meant quiet agreement, hidden beneath fear of confrontation. One afternoon, my maid of honor and I sat in a coffee shop, the same place we had planned flowers months earlier. She pulled up a photo on her phone, me and Ethan walking hand in hand under the arboretum trees. "This is my favorite," she said. I studied the picture. My shoulders were relaxed, my smile unguarded. "It doesn't even look like me," I murmured. "It looks exactly like you," she replied, just without the weight. Her words sank deep. I realized I no longer measured myself against my parents' approval. For the first time, I saw myself as whole without it. At home, Ethan found me looking through the binder again. He leaned over my shoulder, pointing at the vow cards. We should frame these, he said. I nodded. They're proof that we chose ourselves. We did frame them, hanging them in the hallway by our bedroom. Each time I passed, I felt grounded. My parents' silence lingered. But it no longer controlled me. I thought of all the years I had begged for recognition, only to be pushed aside for Brandon. That chapter had ended. Not neatly. Not with reconciliation. But with distance. Sometimes I wondered if they looked at our photos online. If they scrolled in secret. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. Either way, it no longer mattered. One evening, Ethan and I sat on the apartment balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance. He asked, "Do you ever regret it, doing it our way?" I considered carefully. I regret that they couldn't come. But I don't regret choosing us. For once, I stopped waiting. And life didn't end. It began. He smiled, pulling me close. Then we did it right. The binder remains, thick and weighty, a symbol of more than just a wedding. It holds the story of independence, of breaking free from silence and demands. And every time I pass the framed vows, I remind myself, permission is not required for happiness. My story doesn't end with reconciliation. It ends with freedom, the kind that comes quietly, without applause, but deeply, undeniably mine. Looking back now, what stays with me is not the shouting or the silence. It is the calm I found when I stopped asking for permission. For years, I bent myself to fit a family order that was never meant for me. And yet, the moment Ethan and I chose to move forward, life opened wide. I keep the binder still, not as a plan but as a record. Inside are vow cards, receipts, and photographs, evidence that even without the people I once longed to please, joy bloomed anyway. Sometimes I flip through those pages and smile, realizing they mark the first time I wrote my own story without apology. The lesson I carry is simple: family may shape us, but they do not define the limits of our lives. Approval is not the same as love, and silence is not the same as failure. Building a future is not selfish, it is necessary. So, if you've ever faced a choice between waiting for recognition and moving ahead for yourself, I wonder, what did you choose? Did you stay in place? Or did you take that step? I'd love to hear your reflections in the comments. And if my story resonated with you, consider following along. There are more stories like this one, where quiet choices speak louder than any fight. Story 4. The evening started in the polished dining room of my parents' house in Shaker Heights. Their table, the same one we had sat around since childhood, gleamed under the chandelier light. Richard and Margaret, my parents, loved their Sunday dinners: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and too much red wine poured into glasses with little etched vines around the rim. Ryan, my husband, sat beside me, his hand resting lightly on my knee under the table. His palm was warm, steadying, as if he already sensed how uneasy I felt. Across from me sat Chloe, my younger sister by 4 years, tapping the edge of her fork against the plate like a metronome. She had prepared a special dish to celebrate the evening. She insisted on serving it herself. A proud smile stretched across her lips. Pregnancy had made my sense of smell sharp. The moment she placed the small casserole dish in front of me, I caught a bitter scent buried beneath the melted cheese. My stomach clenched, not with nausea but with suspicion. I forced a polite smile and pushed a lock of hair behind my ear. "You'll love it," Chloe said, eyes sparkling in a way that never felt warm. Margaret nodded, her voice gentle but pointed. "Your sister worked hard on this. At least try a bite." Madeline. So I did. The fork felt heavy in my hand. The first mouthful was salty. Too salty, with a strange metallic aftertaste that coated my tongue. Ryan shifted in his chair, watching me chew. I swallowed hard, forcing the food down. Within minutes, my stomach twisted violently. I pressed my palm against my abdomen. 2 months, along with a child, we had waited and prayed for. Sweat prickled my forehead. Ryan leaned in close. "Are you all right?" he whispered. Before I could answer, Chloe's laugh cut across the table. "Careful. Maddie. Wouldn't want you getting food poisoning while you're expecting." The words landed sharper than the fork in my hand. My parents chuckled awkwardly, as though Chloe's comment were a harmless joke. Richard raised his glass, muttering something about young sisters teasing. I felt invisible in that moment. My throat burned. Not from the food, but from the weight of years of being minimized. Ryan's grip tightened around my hand beneath the table. His eyes begged me to speak up, but my voice caught in my chest. I remembered the old family photos on the wall behind my mother's chair, Chloe, as a toddler in frilly dresses. My parents' arms wrapped around her, me standing a step behind, smiling dutifully. That positioning had never changed. Tonight, it was happening again. My pain brushed aside. Chloe's cruelty disguised as humor, and my parents' blind devotion making her untouchable. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed some air. On the porch, the evening was still. Cicadas buzzing in the humid Ohio summer. Ryan followed, holding me upright as another wave of nausea rolled through. "This isn't just bad food," he said quietly. I nodded, my hand trembling against the wooden railing. Inside, laughter carried from the dining room. Muffled, but distinct. They were toasting. Voices rising over clinking glasses. As if nothing had happened. I whispered, more to myself than to Ryan. "They'll never believe me. They never do." But somewhere deep inside, beneath the sickness and the exhaustion, a seed of determination took root. I would not stay silent this time. Not when the safety of my child was at stake. For now, though, I slipped back into my chair, smiled weakly at my parents, and let Chloe bask in her own false innocence. My silence was not surrender. It was preparation. Cleveland. Early 2000s. I was a kid growing up on the east side of the city, 4 years older than Chloe. When she arrived in 2001, the rhythm of our family shifted in an instant. My parents, Richard and Margaret, had always been attentive, but with a new baby in their arms, they turned their gaze almost entirely away from me. At 4, I didn't fully understand. I just knew that Chloe's crib was filled with soft toys while my own bed still had the same faded blanket from preschool. Every visitor who came through the door cooed over the baby. "She's beautiful. Margaret, she looks just like you." My name was rarely mentioned. By the time I hit grade school, responsibilities piled on. Margaret would press a laundry basket into my arms with a smile that was more command than gratitude. "Fold these while I get Chloe settled." Richard expected me to clear the table, sweep the floor, keep Chloe entertained when she grew fussy. There were moments I felt proud of helping. I carried Chloe on my hip down the hall, singing little rhymes I made up. But more often, I felt old before my time. When classmates talked about cartoons or trips to Cedar Point Amusement Park, I thought about the dinners I cooked or the laundry I sorted. Middle school was worse. Chloe, then in elementary, charmed everyone. Teachers praised her drawings. My parents pinned her certificates to the fridge, and family gatherings revolved around her stories. I was the one asked to fetch juice, to set out plates, and to disappear into chores while adults clapped for Chloe's little recitals. One memory stays sharp. I had just brought home a science fair ribbon. 3rd place, but hard-earned after weeks of work. I set it on the counter, expecting at least a smile. That same afternoon, Chloe toddled in with a scribbled drawing of stick figures. Margaret taped it to the fridge over my ribbon without hesitation. "Look how creative she is," she beamed. I swallowed my disappointment, but inside something hardened. I learned not to expect applause. High school should have been my escape, but favoritism followed me. Chloe was entering middle school then. Already the star in choir. The darling of our neighborhood. Relatives asked, "How's Chloe doing?" before they remembered I was standing right there. I buried myself in work. After school shifts at the library, stacking books. Babysitting for neighbors. Anything to earn a little independence. I used my earnings to buy notebooks. Sometimes clothes. Because asking Richard or Margaret felt like begging for scraps. One night in 10th grade, I overheard my parents whispering at the kitchen table. Richard's voice was low, but clear enough. "We'll have to save for Chloe's college. She's gifted. Madeline can manage on her own." I stood frozen in the hallway, the words pressing into my chest like a weight. At school, I did well, but no one at home seemed to notice. When report cards arrived with rows of As, Margaret glanced at them quickly before sliding them aside. If Chloe brought home a single good grade, the entire evening was filled with celebration. I became invisible in plain sight. "Chloe, Shona," I endured. Still, part of me hoped things might change once I grew older. Once I left the house, I told myself that college would be the start of something different. For now, I kept my head down, did the work asked of me, and dreamed quietly of a day when I wouldn't be measured against Chloe anymore. By 2018, I was finally stepping into my own life. College graduation felt like a small victory. Not just for the degree, but for the quiet promise I made to myself. I would not keep living in Chloe's shadow. Downtown Cleveland became my landscape. The apartment I rented was small, 2 rooms. Squeaky radiator. Narrow balcony, but it was mine. From the 12th floor, I could see Lake Erie on clear days, a streak of blue stretching beyond the city's rooftops. I worked long hours, juggling entry-level office tasks and evening shifts at a bookstore. It was exhausting, but every paycheck I folded into my bank account tasted like freedom. My parents rarely visited. Margaret called occasionally, mostly to update me on Chloe's performances or her plans for choir trips. Richard would nod in the background, asking little about my job. I learned to fill the silence on those calls with polite MMMS, even as disappointment prickled inside me. It was during this stretch of independence that I met Ryan. He came into the bookstore, one late shift. Tall, patient smile, asking for a novel that was long out of print. I couldn't find it, but we talked until closing. He came back a week later, and again the week after. Slowly, his visits turned into dinners, then walks by the lake, then weekends spent exploring the city together. Ryan was different. He listened, really listened. When I spoke, he didn't compare me to anyone, didn't measure my worth by another's shine. For the first time, I felt seen. By 2022, we stood together at the altar of a small church in Cleveland Heights. I wore a simple gown, nothing extravagant. But the way Ryan looked at me made it feel like the world had tilted in my favor. My parents sat in the front pew. Richard adjusted his tie. Margaret dabbed her eyes. But their expressions were reserved. They clapped politely after the vows, congratulated Chloe more warmly than me when she sang during the reception. Still, I tried to convince myself that their presence meant something. The wedding ring, cool and solid on my finger, became a quiet anchor. It wasn't about the applause from my family anymore. It was about the life Ryan and I were building. We moved into a modest apartment near Playhouse Square, filled it with secondhand furniture and mismatched mugs. On weekends, Ryan cooked pancakes while I read aloud from whatever book he pulled off the shelf. In those moments, I began to believe that maybe the years of invisibility were fading. And then, early in 2023, the test turned positive. 2 lines on a strip of paper changed everything. I stood in the bathroom gripping that plastic stick, heart pounding, eyes blurring with tears. Ryan hugged me so tightly I thought I'd break apart from joy. For the first time, I felt like I was carrying not just a child, but also the proof that my life had meaning beyond what my parents ever acknowledged. I wanted to believe they would celebrate with me. Finally proud. but a quiet fear lingered. I knew Chloe. I knew how she reacted when attention shifted away from her. And I sensed that my pregnancy would ignite something I wasn't ready for. I told myself this child would be the start of a new chapter. One where I finally stepped out of Chloe's shadow. I didn't yet realize how violently she would try to drag me back under it. Summer of 2023 arrived thick with Ohio humidity. By then, I was 2 months pregnant, still adjusting to the strange mix of exhaustion and elation that came with it. Ryan and I had kept the news quiet, wanting to share it at the right moment. That moment came during one of our parents' Sunday dinners in Shaker Heights. The house smelled of polish and roast meat. Familiar scents from my childhood. Margaret had set the table with her best china. The white plates with the thin silver rims. As if to mark a special occasion, Chloe, as usual, made an entrance. She wore a pale yellow dress that drew every eye. Her smile wide. Her voice loud enough to fill the room. I sat beside Ryan, trying to ignore the tight knot in my stomach. Announcing the pregnancy should have felt joyful, but with Chloe across the table, I worried it would become another performance for her to eclipse. When the moment came, I spoke softly. Ryan and I, we're expecting. Ryan squeezed my hand, his eyes bright. But across the table, Chloe's fork clattered onto her plate. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Wow, she said slowly. You beat me to it. Guess I'll have to catch up. Margaret gasped, then laughed lightly, as though Chloe had made a harmless joke. Richard lifted his glass in a perfunctory toast. Only Ryan's hand, steady in mine, gave me comfort. Dinner continued, but the air felt heavy. Chloe disappeared into the kitchen midway through the meal and returned carrying a steaming casserole dish. Special recipe, she announced, placing it directly in front of me. Made it just for tonight. The smell hit me instantly. Something sharp, almost chemical, under the cheese and breadcrumbs. He hesitated, but Margaret nudged, smiling. Go on. Madeline, your sister went to the trouble. I took a bite. The taste was off salty, bitter, metallic. My stomach churned almost immediately. Ryan noticed, leaning close. Don't eat any more, he whispered, his hand brushing my arm. But Chloe watched me with a fixed smile. Careful. Maddie, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Wouldn't want you getting food poisoning while pregnant. Her words cut through me. Richard chuckled uncomfortably, as if it were just teasing. Margaret waved her hand, dismissing the tension. But heat rose in my chest, sweat prickling my forehead. My vision blurred for a moment. Fear clawing at me, not for myself, but for the tiny life inside me. Ryan's eyes widened, his arm wrapping protectively around me. I excused myself, stumbling to the porch for air. The night was sticky with cicada song, but at least I could breathe. Ryan followed, steadying me. This isn't normal, he whispered. She did something. I looked back through the dining room window. Chloe laughed, tossing her hair, basking in the attention. While our parents smiled indulgently, they didn't see the danger. They never had. My hand pressed against my abdomen. I whispered to Ryan. They'll say it's nothing. They always do. Inside, the clinking of glasses grew louder. Another toast. Another round of laughter. As though my pain had no place at their table. That dinner marked a shift in me. For years, I had swallowed disappointment, buried resentment, endured invisibility. But as I stood there on the porch, dizzy and afraid, I felt something else bloom, a resolve I had never allowed myself before. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my child. I returned to the table that night with a weak smile, pretending to play along. But inside, I was already planning. Silence had shielded Chloe long enough. The morning after that dinner, I woke in our downtown apartment with my stomach still knotted. Ryan had barely slept. He paced the hardwood floor until dawn, insisting we see a doctor. By mid-morning, we sat in a sterile clinic room with pale green walls and posters warning about dehydration. The doctor ran tests, assuring us the baby seemed unharmed, though I needed fluids and rest. When the nurse handed me the bill, the number felt like a punch. $600. Ryan slipped his card onto the counter before I could argue. But the figure burned into my mind. 600, just because my sister decided to make a joke with food. Back home, I sank into our couch, clutching a glass of water. Ryan sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "You can't let this go," he said quietly. "She put you and the baby at risk." I nodded. But fear tangled with exhaustion. My parents had dismissed me before. Why would this time be any different? Later that night, as Ryan slept, I scrolled through my phone. That's when I saw it, the message Chloe had sent the day before dinner. The words glowed on the screen like poison. "Hope you're careful with what you eat. Not everything agrees with a pregnant stomach." My pulse quickened. I opened our old threads, and more messages surfaced, snide remarks, veiled threats, barbed jokes alluding to accidents and mishaps. I had ignored them before, telling myself she was just being mean. But seeing them now, against the backdrop of what happened at dinner, the pattern was undeniable. I took screenshots, one after another, until my gallery filled with evidence. For the first time, I felt a surge of control. My parents could wave away my words, but they couldn't erase Chloe's texts. The next day, I sat at our small dining table, phone in hand, scrolling through the evidence. The light from the window cast sharp lines across the wood, highlighting each screenshot as though the sun itself was underlining the truth. Ryan leaned over my shoulder, his brow furrowed. "This is enough," he said. "She can't talk her way out of this." But doubt gnawed at me. "They'll still defend her." "Maybe," Ryan admitted. "But they can't deny the proof." I stared at the ring on my finger, the symbol of the family I was building. I wasn't just a daughter or a sister anymore. I was a mother-to-be. My silence no longer protected anyone, it only endangered the life growing inside me. That night, I placed my phone on the nightstand and whispered, "They can't deny this." The words felt like a vow. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the overlooked child. I felt like someone ready to defend what mattered most. A week after that disastrous dinner, I sat across from my parents in their living room. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. Familiar but suffocating. I had asked to meet, hoping naively that they would finally hear me. Ryan sat beside me, steady but silent, letting me lead. Richard leaned back in his recliner, arms folded, while Margaret perched on the edge of the sofa cushion, eyes soft, almost pitying. Chloe sprawled across the other armchair, phone in hand, scrolling with a grin she didn't bother to hide. I cleared my throat. Something happened at dinner. Chloe's food made me sick. I was terrified for the baby. Margaret waved her hand. "Oh, Madeline, you've always been sensitive." Richard sighed. "Chloe was joking. You know how she is. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." My heart pounded. A big deal out of nothing. $600 in medical bills and nights of nausea weren't nothing. I opened my mouth again. But Chloe spoke first. Her tone light, mocking. "Honestly, Maddie, you should thank me. Builds up your immune system." She chuckled at her own line. My parents smiled faintly. Indulgent. The way they always had when Chloe performed. I looked down at my hands. Fingers clenched together so tightly my knuckles whitened. I wanted to shout, to shake them, to demand they finally see me. Instead, my voice cracked with restraint. "She put me at risk. She put my child at risk." Margaret's expression tightened. We don't need drama in this family. I felt Ryan shift beside me. His jaw tight. His patience wearing thin. But I shook my head slightly. It a silent plea to let me handle it. The conversation ended with shallow promises to move on. Chloe laughed all the way to the door, tossing her hair. Smoke in her victory. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A group chat notification. Clue again lighten up. Maddie. Don't be so dramatic. A string of laughing emojis followed. Richard responded with a thumbs up. Margaret added a heart. My stomach twisted. They weren't just dismissing me in person, they were doubling down. Joining in her mockery. Ryan read over my shoulder, fury flashing in his eyes. Enough, he said. Voice low. I stared at the screen, then slowly scrolled down to the folder where I had saved the screenshots. The threatening texts glowed in the dark room. Undeniable proof of what Chloe had done. I whispered, almost to myself. Not this time. The next dinner would not end in silence. I was ready to let the truth speak louder than their denial. The next Sunday, I returned to Shaker Heights with Ryan at my side. My parents' dining room looked the same as always: white plates, polished silverware, framed photos of Chloe smiling from the walls. But I felt different walking in. My phone, heavy in my pocket, was loaded with proof. Richard greeted us with a curt nod. Margaret offered a careful smile, as if wary of tension but unwilling to admit it. Chloe arrived last, tossing her purse onto the counter with a flourish. Hope tonight's less dramatic, she quipped, sliding into her chair. Dinner began quietly. Conversation forced. Margaret asked about the weather. Richard mumbled about work. Chloe leaned back, swirling hair wine. Eyes locked on me with that same smugness. I waited until plates were half empty before speaking. We need to talk about what happened last week. Chloe rolled her eyes. Oh. Maddie. Not this again. Ryan's hand brushed mine under the table. Steadying me, I kept my gaze on my parents. It wasn't just a joke. I got sick. I went to the doctor. $600 later. I had proof something was wrong. And I have messages from Chloe about it. Chloe's laugh cut sharp. You're really reaching. Everyone knows you're dramatic. Show them. Then, let's see your so-called proof. Her arrogance gave me the opening I needed. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked my phone, scrolled to the screenshots, and laid it flat on the table. Richard leaned forward. Squinting, Margaret adjusted her glasses. The words glared back at them in black and white. Hope you're careful with what you eat. Not everything agrees with a pregnant stomach. Followed by the string of laughing emojis. The room went still. The clinking of utensils stopped. Even Chloe's smile faltered. Ryan's voice broke the silence. That's not teasing. That's a threat. Chloe pushed back in her chair, her tone suddenly sharp. It was a joke. She takes everything too seriously. But her face flushed. Her composure, cracking. My parents stared at the phone, their silence louder than any denial. Richard's jaw tightened. Margaret's hands fidgeted in her lap. For the first time, I felt the weight shift. Years of invisibility cracked open under the glare of undeniable proof. Chloe shoved her chair back, muttering curses under her breath, and stormed out of the dining room. The slam of the front door echoed through the house. Silence lingered. My parents said nothing. They didn't defend me. But they didn't defend her either. It was enough. Ryan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His eyes held mine. Steady. Certain. They finally know, he whispered. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. The truth was out. They could no longer deny it. And that was enough for me. Fall settled over Cleveland with crisp air and trees painted in amber and red. From our apartment balcony, I watched the city lights flicker on earlier each evening. A quiet reminder of time moving forward. Inside, Ryan brewed tea while I rested on the couch, my hand resting gently over the curve of my stomach. Weeks had passed since the confrontation. Chloe hadn't called. My parents hadn't apologized. Instead, silence stretched between us like an uncrossable river. Margaret sent one short message about the weather. Richard forwarded an article about home repairs. Not once did they ask how I was feeling or how the baby was growing. It stung. But not in the same way it used to. For the first time, I didn't ache for their approval. I didn't feel invisible. I felt free. Ryan joined me with 2 steaming mugs. Setting one in front of me. "You've been quiet tonight," he said softly. I shrugged, smiling faintly. I was just thinking about how different everything feels. He reached for my hand, thumb brushing the band of my wedding ring. "Different good." "Yes," I said firmly. "Different good." On the wall across from us hung a small frame, our wedding photo. Not my parents' pictures of Chloe. Not decades of favoritism. Just one moment of our choosing. Me in my gown. Ryan smiling as if nothing else in the world mattered. That was the family that mattered now. I knew Chloe's standing with our parents had shifted. They couldn't unsee the text. Couldn't ignore what she had done. Even if they never admitted it out loud. The trust they had in her had cracked. That was her consequence, her reputation at home dimmed. Her mask of innocence stripped away. And my quiet justice was simple. I no longer needed them to believe me. The proof had spoken. Ryan leaned closer. "You did the right thing, Maddie. You protected yourself and the baby." I exhaled, slowly, letting the words settle. I had carried the weight of invisibility for so long. Now, as autumn winds brushed the glass, I felt lighter. The silence from my parents wasn't peace, but it was space. And sometimes, space is the only boundary you can build. My story didn't end with apologies or reconciliations. It ended with me choosing my own family, my own boundaries, and finally stepping out of the shadow that had followed me since childhood. The autumn air in Cleveland carried a kind of stillness I had never felt before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing my parents' approval or competing with Chloe's spotlight. The silence from Shaker Heights stung at moments. But it also reminded me that distance can be its own kind of peace. Ryan and I filled that silence with small rituals, quiet breakfasts, evening walks, and conversations about the baby's future. Each moment anchored me in the life we were creating. A life that didn't depend on my parents' validation. Looking back, the pattern had been there from the start. Years of favoritism. Years of being minimized. Years of swallowing my voice. But that summer, when Chloe's actions crossed into real danger, I chose something different. I chose to protect myself and my child. Even if it meant breaking the family's illusion of harmony. There were no dramatic apologies. Not perfect reconciliation. Instead, there was truth. The text spoke louder than excuses. And the weight of denial shifted off my shoulders. That was enough. Quiet justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with proof in your hands. Strength in your voice. And the courage to draw a boundary that should have been there all along. If you think Madeline made the right choice, comment right. If you would have handled it differently, share your idea below. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe. You never know when the next family secret will hit close to home. Story 5. I was shunned by my parents for 14 years since I married someone who wasn't religious. They just phoned and said they missed me. It turns out that my dying grandma requires a kidney transplant. And they just contacted me and my kids to ask if we might donate. My grandparents, who had raised me since I was a little kid, made the decision to completely shut me out of their life 14 years ago. Why? They didn't agree with my choice to wed my hubby. He was not, in their opinion, worthy of their family name or position. It was a devastating blow that left me struggling with thoughts of betrayal and grief. These individuals had been my sole family for a long time. After all, You know, I lost both of my parents in a terrible accident when I was just 7 years old. Fortunately. However, my grandparents took me in as their own. I will always be thankful for it, especially at their age. They didn't need to shoulder the burden of parenting a second kid. However, they did. I at least had a secure place to live and people who, in their own way, showed me love and stability, rather than being placed in foster care or an adoption center. My fundamental necessities were satisfied in the household where I grew up, and I will always be grateful to them for it. But thankfulness doesn't change the reality of what it was like to grow up in their home. Even though I received a lot of attention, their rigid and controlling methods caused me a great deal of emotional and mental stress. My grandparents had strict ideas about how life should be lived and were quite conventional. They had strong religious convictions, and they wanted me to follow them blindly. This stood in sharp contrast to the upbringing I received from my parents throughout those formative years. My parents had been more laid back and accepting while they were living. They never pressured me to adhere to a strict faith. It was the other way around with my grandparents. However, they were non-negotiable and had a lot of regulations. There was no chance of breaking them. The home was run like a military camp, especially by my grandpa. His mannerisms and treatment of people were still influenced by his years of service in the army. Instead of asking for things, he gave commands by barking. Everyone around him, even my grandma, was supposed to be completely obedient and disciplined. In many respects, she carried the majority of his domineering traits. Even when she was tired or ill, she was supposed to do all of the cooking, cleaning, and housework without his assistance. I was aware of the inequality in their relationship even as a young kid. Life with my grandparents became even more constrained as I got older. I was not even close to being a typical child because of them. I was prohibited from doing most activities, while other kids my age were free to play, make new friends, and take delight in life's little joys. I was not permitted to wear skirts, sleeveless dresses, or tops. For example, they didn't want me to display any arms. Thus, they thought that kind of attire was improper, even immoral. I had to always get my hair plaited. No exclusions. They referred to it as unruly hair, which was unacceptable in their home. Their strict standards of discipline and humility had to be met by my appearance at all times. I wanted to try out a new hairdo or dress up like my peers, but they didn't care since I was only a child. Their so-called norms governed every aspect of my appearance and behavior. The story didn't end there. I had to go directly home after school, whereas other students would remain a bit later to join a school club or hang out with pals. No excuses. No diversions. I was supposed to pray and begin doing my schoolwork as soon as I got home. I had to go to bed hungry that night since my grandpa would fervently inspect my bag every night and refuse to give me food if he discovered that I had earned poor scores on any of my papers. Additionally, my room needed to be completely dust-free at all times. Additionally, I wasn't just reprimanded if they discovered even the smallest item out of position. I received 10 spankings on my palms. I vividly remember how it hurt and how I would always weep. But they didn't seem to mind. Additionally, I was not permitted to have friends unless my grandparents gave their consent, and it was almost hard to achieve their approval requirements. As you can surely imagine, I was not allowed to develop a relationship with someone if they didn't like their background, family, or even their tone of speech. My grandpa also held the antiquated view that women had no business learning to drive. As if all of this weren't enough, he didn't just dissuade me from wanting to drive like other people when I became 16. He just forbade it. He believed that motors and women were a horrible combination, and whatever aspirations I may have had to drive were written off as absurd. It's hard to believe how much I've been through in retrospect. But at the moment, I had no option but to accept everything. This was all I knew. And this was my life. I had no one else to turn to and nowhere else to go. My whole existence revolved around their home. I also persuaded myself that their restrictions were typical and that this was the way all families functioned. I didn't start to view things differently until I started college. However, it was a struggle just to go to college. My granddad vehemently opposed it. I didn't need a college degree, he thought. He felt that marrying the son of one of his close friends would be a better use of my time. As if my life were a chess piece that he could move to any location. He had everything planned out. However, I was unable to accept that. I pleaded because I understood deep down that I wanted more for myself. I begged him for allowing me to go to college. It wasn't simple. It took a great deal of arguing before he finally gave in. For the first time in my life, I felt free once I arrived at college and saw how different life might be. To be honest, I was shocked that someone like my husband would even want to speak to me when we first met in college. I didn't know how to relate to people my own age, since I had lived my whole life in such a regimented, confining atmosphere. I felt insecure, awkward, and unsociable. I didn't know how to make friends, or simply have a conversation without constantly questioning what I was saying. However, he made it simple. He put me at ease right away, and gave me the impression that I didn't need to hide who I was. He was able to see through the barriers I had put up around myself. And rather than condemning me, he gently assisted me in tearing them down. We were pals at first. He never hurried me into anything or pushed me. We gradually came to know one another. We fell in love before I even realized it. It wasn't the type of love that makes you fall head over heels in a dramatic movie. It was calm, steady, gentle, the kind of love that gives you a sense of security. Since he transformed my life in ways I never would have imagined. I can honestly say that I'm grateful to have discovered him. It was a surprise to meet his family. I didn't know what to anticipate. But they were really kind and friendly as soon as I entered their house. They welcomed me with open arms and gave me the impression that I was welcome. I had never experienced anything like that. It was eye-opening to see how they interacted with one another. No harsh words. No scolding. And no strict regulations loomed over them like ominous clouds. In a manner that seemed so natural, they supported one another, laughed together, and showed respect for one another. My experience with my grandparents had been quite different. So I had no idea that families could operate in that way. I eventually felt like I was a part of his family. I wasn't just accepted into their life. They gave me a thorough hug. For the first time, I didn't have to compromise who I was, or skirt around other people's expectations in order to feel like I belonged. I was able to begin seeing a life outside the boundaries my grandparents had set for me, because of that feeling of love and acceptance. However, I didn't tell my grandparents about my connection with my partner throughout my time in college. If they discovered out I was seeing someone, I knew how they would respond. They wanted me to stay out of relationships. My whole destiny was predetermined in their eyes. It was impossible for me to deviate from the arrangement that I was supposed to wed the son of my grandfather's friend. In order to keep my love and happiness hidden from them, I concealed the most significant aspect of my existence. I eventually got the confidence to confront my grandparents after completing college and securing a respectable career. It was among the most difficult things I have ever done. They responded just as I had feared when I informed them that I wanted a new life, a life of my own choice. Specifically, my grandpa was incensed. He said I was lying to him and using college to get away from him. He claimed that I had been scheming against him the whole time, leaving him feeling caught off guard and deceived. Securing my freedom, in his opinion, I was an act of rebellion rather than a step towards creating my own destiny. My granny was heartbroken as well. She begged me to return home so I could live under their restrictions once again. She was unable to comprehend my decision to reject the life they had prepared for me or to oppose them. Her main contention was that by defying their desires, I was upsetting God. She really thought that I was endangering not just my happiness, but also my soul, by declining to wed the guy they had selected for me. I ignored what my grandparents said and kept creating the life I want for myself, in spite of their unwavering condemnation. I remained with my spouse, and we became closer every day. He asked me to marry him after 2 years of dating, and I was more than delighted to accept. It seemed like a time of unadulterated love and excitement. The start of a brand new chapter, full of promise and opportunity. Naturally, however, My grandparents saw it as a chance to vent their frustration and disgust in me once again. They asked me to join them for lunch, after learning of the engagement. I first believed that this may be their attempt to make amends. Perhaps stupidly. I thought they would want to make amends, or at least attempt to comprehend my choice. However, as soon as I got there, it was obvious that they had really bad intentions. The meal swiftly devolved into an emotional manipulation and verbal abuse session. They didn't take long to express their disappointment in me. Specifically, my grandpa didn't mince any harsh remarks. He attempted to guilt-trip me into ending my engagement to my spouse by claiming that my parents would be embarrassed by my transformation. He wasn't good enough for me, they said. They said that he wasn't financially successful in comparison to the other guys they thought I could have married. I pointed out that it was absurd to expect someone my age to be richer than me, since both my spouse and I were in our 22nd. And his riches didn't matter to me. I couldn't have wished for a finer companion to live my life with. And he was my partner in every way. But my grandparents didn't care about any of it. Their primary concern appeared to be that my husband wasn't from a rich family, and that they had always hoped their only granddaughter would wed a wealthy guy. Ever demanding and judgmental. That my grandpa compared my husband to other men who could, in his view, provide me a luxurious lifestyle, and even support them financially if necessary. It was all about money and prestige. They didn't care how much my husband had previously done to support me, or how much he loved me. Wealth and looks were more important to them than love and a relationship. To exacerbate the situation, my grandpa then said that they would be forced to stop communicating with me if I did in fact marry my husband. He gave the impression that I was solely to blame, as if I was pressuring them to give me this ultimatum. He said that by marrying my husband, I was giving up the cozy life they had planned for me and committing to a lifetime of hardship. They did it in an attempt to frighten me and make me question my choice. The problem is that I had put up with their critiques and judgments for far too long. I deserved to be happy. And I knew what kind of life I desired. I wasn't going to sacrifice what my spouse had taught me about genuine love and support in order to meet their outmoded standards. So, despite the pain of their comments, I remain steadfast. If they choose to cut me off, then so be it. I refuse to let their resentment control my destiny. Consequently, I married my spouse. Furthermore, I can state with confidence that I've never felt bad about the choice. And not for a second. My spouse and I have had our share of difficulties throughout the years. But together, we've survived every adversity. We've always had each other. Through good times and bad. And I still wake up every morning, thankful for our love. With two amazing children who have filled our lives with so much love and happiness. We are now a family of 4. I often consider how my life would have turned out if I hadn't taken the risk of putting my pleasure ahead of my grandparents' expectations when I look at our little family. My life with my spouse is all I could have ever dreamed of. He has been my best friend, my companion, and my rock. A part of me still longs for the family I lost. Despite all the joy I've discovered, I haven't spoken to my grandparents in 14 years. Over the years, I've tried to get in touch with them in the hopes of making amends. But I've always been greeted with silence. They have decided to ignore me entirely. As like, I don't even exist. Some of my family claim that they behave as like I never existed and never even mention me. Knowing that the same folks who brought me up now consider me to be a failure is distressing. I've got to accept it for what it is. Despite how terrible it is. This week, an unforeseen event occurred. I sometimes spoke with my distant cousin, and she phoned me unexpectedly. She informed me that my grandpa had contacted her and requested my phone information in order to get in touch with me. I was taken aback. This sudden attention seemed odd, even suspicious. After 14 years of stillness, my cousin also agreed. Since she had already given him my number, she claimed she wanted to let me know, so I would be ready, in case there was more to it than first seemed. A glimmer of hope flickered through me. Is this an indication that my grandparents have changed their minds and want to make amends? Could my grandpa have decided he wanted to get back in touch after all this time? However, I was also unable to ignore the misgivings that were beginning to surface. What if there was a hidden agenda, given how domineering and demanding my grandparents had always been? It was difficult to avoid wondering whether this newfound wish to connect was related to anything other than sincere regret. My granddad finally gave me a call yesterday. We hadn't spoken for 14 years. So it seemed weird. Almost unreal. To hear his voice again. He gave me a clumsy greeting, as if he was unsure of how to start. The discussion began with small chat. He appeared genuinely interested in my life and inquired how I had been. I updated him on my life, including my spouse and our 2 children, inquiring about them as if he wanted to know the family I had created. He showed curiosity in meeting them. It seemed almost normal for a second, like he was attempting to close the distance that had developed between us. But the elephant in the room was too big to ignore. Since he and my grandma had been the ones to cut me off in the first place, I asked him straight out why he was still phoning. I wasn't holding back. I reminded him that I was still contentedly married to the guy they had so strongly disapproved of and who they believed wasn't worthy of me. My granddad started to explain at that point. Him said that my grandma and him were becoming older and that they just wanted to get back in touch with me before it was too late. He continued by saying that he had been missing me, but had been too obstinate to acknowledge it, and that he regretted cutting me off all those years ago. To be honest, I didn't feel comfortable when my grandpa said that he had been missing me. My intuition took over, and I couldn't get rid of the uneasy sensation. As you can see, my grandpa doesn't express his emotions. I don't remember him ever expressing feelings like missing someone while I was growing up. He was usually aloof, austère, and dominating. Even his own parents are not missed by him. It seemed very out of character for him to use such emotive words all of a sudden. The timing was another factor. Why did it take him 14 years to get in touch with me if he had been really missing me? Why now? Suddenly, I found myself wondering what he was up to. It takes time for people to evolve. And my grandpa has always placed a high importance on power and self-interest. Was there anything I could do for him? Did he contact me because he really regretted it? Or was there another reason? My grandpa went on to add that he wanted me to bring my kids to see him and grandma so we could spend some time together. However, when I asked whether my husband could also come visit us, he said rather frankly that he would rather that guy didn't come, making it obvious that only I and the children were welcome at his place. That remark infuriated me right away. My children are more than just my offspring. They are a part of my hubby and myself. It didn't make sense to welcome my children while keeping out the guy who had loved and supported me for years and helped raise them. His remark seemed offensive. Any effort to dismiss or exclude my spouse is an assault on our whole family, since he is just as much a part of my life as my children are. I didn't hold back. I bluntly informed my grandpa that he had to quit imposing these limitations and conditions if he really wanted to get back in touch with us. I made it plain that neither I nor the children would ever want to be involved in his life again if he was still unable to accept my spouse. I clarified that my spouse is my partner in every aspect, and my better half, whether they are related or not. I will not let anybody into my life that treats him disrespectfully or excludes him. I maintain that standard for everybody who wants to be a part of my life because that's simply who I am. My granddad didn't like what I said. He lost his temper and took out on a tirade, accusing me of trying to make him like my husband when he didn't have to. He said that because my children and I were his family, it was only fair that he stay in touch with us, once again suggesting that my spouse may not be included in this relationship at all. He said that my spouse could re-establish contact with me and my children without my involvement. I had had enough by then. First of all, he was the one who had phoned me after all this time, and he continued to attempt to dominate me in the same manner, without accepting any responsibility for his previous behavior. Secondly, he was insisting that I agree with him whether I liked it or not, and he was not showing the customary regard for my sentiments. I made it clear to my grandpa that we had nothing more to talk about if this was his position. To appease him, I wasn't willing to sacrifice my morals or the harmony of my family. I then hung up the phone. My grandpa has been phoning me ever since, leaving voicemails, since I no longer answer his calls. I'm obviously upset with the way I'm handling things, accusing me of being so snobby. He stated that I owed it to him and my grandmother to at least give them another opportunity since he reared me. He claims it is unjust and impolite of me to not get back in touch with him on his terms. Additionally, he is adamant that I just put the past behind me and consent to re-establishing our connection. Update 1. Aita. I want to start by saying thank you to everyone who has confirmed my assumptions. Something about my grandfather's sudden want to get back in touch doesn't seem right. In my opinion, he's a very poisonous guy. And I find it hard to believe that he would suddenly miss me and feel bad about cutting me off after we've been silent for 14 years. More than he's prepared to acknowledge. There's a good chance that something is driving him. And I can't deny that sensation. However, I also want to be fair and accept the remote chance that I could be mistaken. I would be amenable to having my children meet him if he is sincere. Really sorry for what he did. And wants to make things right. One item, nevertheless, cannot be negotiated. My grandparents must accept and respect my spouse if they want to interact with my children in any way. It would send the incorrect message to my spouse and my kids if I let my grandparents participate in their lives while keeping my husband out. I won't set an example for kids like that. However, I'll think about making modest moves to mend our connection if my grandparents are somehow prepared to own up to the past and accept my position. This does not imply ignoring the pain they inflicted on me or acting carelessly. It entails establishing limits and only proceeding when it is in my family's and my best interests. The second update. 2 weeks have passed since my previous post. And all I can say is that I was correct to follow my intuition. I just received some unsettling news. My granny has become quite sick. After she was admitted to the hospital, the physicians determined that she had renal failure. She needs a kidney transplant immediately and is receiving dialysis. The reason she and my grandpa have been contacting me is that I am their only grandchild. Thus, my children are also their grandkids. For her kidney transplant, they must determine which of us would be a good fit. My grandmother's illness was brought to my attention by some of my distant cousins who had paid her a visit in the hospital to see how she was doing. They say she seems really ill and weak. It's obvious that she's in a serious condition. Based on my understanding, this is the reason my grandpa has been so eager to get back in touch with me. His calls suddenly make sense in terms of urgency. He has been pressuring me to come, so he can recommend that we be tested. He obviously wants to find out whether we would be a good fit to give her a kidney. Now that I am fully aware of the situation, I am really incensed and very irate. On the one hand, I'm sorry about my grandmother's health. However, I continue to struggle with my own sense of betrayal and my relationship with my grandparents. My grandparents need a kidney transplant. So how can they even think they can simply come to me and my children and ask us to be their lifeline? They suddenly want us to quit everything and offer them something as valuable as an organ after 14 years of poisonous behavior and silence. They have no right to think that we would even want to assist them. All this time, they didn't even give a damn about keeping up a connection with my husband, my children, or myself. And now they believe it's okay to merely reappear in our life, as if nothing had happened during a crisis. The insolence is enragement. The third update. My granddad contacted me once again a week after I previously provided an update. I explained to him this time that I was well aware of what was going on with Grandma, and that neither the children nor I wanted to assist them. I advised him to approach other family members for assistance if they were available. At this point, my grandpa became much more hostile and began to assault me. He stated things like, I had committed a crime by marrying a guy who wasn't part of our church, and that I had wrecked my life after marrying my spouse. Those were harsh statements. He was quite clear that he would never have shut me out from his life if I had married someone who shared my beliefs. At this point, everything made sense to me. Even though my husband had never done anything wrong, I had always wondered why my grandpa was so bitter and contemptuous of him and why he couldn't accept my spouse. I was at last aware of the reality. It was all a matter of trust. I became even more enraged with my grandpa after realizing this. I forcefully expressed to him my embarrassment at even having a relative like him. I would never be able to have a guy around my kids or in my life who could be so blinded by his hate for someone because of their beliefs or religion. I informed him that, due to something as ludicrous and disgusting as his intolerance, I would never forgive him for his words or the way he had treated my husband, my kids, and myself. It seemed unbelievable to me that there had always been a part of me that hoped he may change in the future. However, after listening to his obvious stupidity, I realized that there was no going back. My grandpa attempted to alter his mind at this point. Even if I didn't like him, he began to add, I should at least think about assisting my grandmother, who was ill and in need of our care. He made an effort to win my affection by claiming that I owed them since he and his grandmother had reared me after adopting me after the passing of my parents. At this point, I informed him that cohabitating with them was not easy. I had endured years of torture under their roof as payment for my dues. They all chastised me for marrying a guy who did not share their beliefs. Even though I complied with all of their regulations, I explained to my grandpa that, even though I felt sorry for them at the moment, I no longer felt obligated to assist them. They were no longer my family. After all, my grandpa began yelling at me and calling me some derogatory things. But I ignored him. I blocked him and ended the call. His poisonous, deceptive remarks were no longer acceptable to me. He had finally revealed me who he really was, and he had spoken his opinions clearly. Regardless of our genetic links, I was not going to let someone like that return to my life.